My name is Asimwe John. I work with the Africa Freedom of Information Center. Currently at AFIC, we're implementing a grant that is funded by the Association of Progressive Communications together with the Africa Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms. Basically, the grant was to look at the impact of the current situation, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the government's measures to curb the spread on the digital rights. And we commissioned or constituted a study that was going to look at the 4 of the 13 principles that are provided for by the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms. And in this case, we're looking at the accessibility and affordability of the digital rights amidst COVID-19. How have the measures that have been put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19 affected the digital rights? And our findings were looking at a number of things, including one, appreciating the fact that the government of Uganda has been giving out information, but then we're looking at, do all the people receive this information, and what platforms or measures that are being used? Can all Ugandans access the internet? Is it affordable for everyone? How then do we ensure that the implementation, promotion and enjoyment of the internet freedoms and rights are adhered to or promoted by the government?
During this COVID-19 pandemic, women have been disproportionately affected. Women have not been able to access internet and use internet. So most of the policies that have been put out there are not gender responsive. So we would think that the government and the stakeholders involved should be able to put out policies that are gender responsive in this time of the COVID-19 so that everyone can access information, everyone can be able to express themselves.
I work with Unwanted Witness, an organization that focuses on technology and human rights. And during the COVID-19 lockdown, we've experienced issues of limitation of the work of human rights defenders simply because they cannot access internet. So you find that they're limited in terms of performance, but also delivery of the service, which is really highly needed during the lockdown because of the many violations that we've seen. We also seen contact tracking systems, applications being developed. So we're putting a question of accountability and transparency of these apps that are collecting a lot of personal data, shared between private companies, but also with government. We also want to see government scrap the OTT tax. This is affecting the way information is flowing down to the communities.
Digital platforms, especially the internet, social media and websites have become the most common channel through which government agencies are disseminating information on the prevention and management of COVID-19 pandemic that has affected many people, and yet many people are excluded from accessing information through these channels. In addition, the OTT tax, which was introduced by government, also excludes many people from accessing internet, especially at this time when people's incomes have been affected. So in view of those, we call upon the government of Uganda and indeed other governments in Africa to promote access to information by ensuring that everyone has access to digital platforms. That too, access should be free or at low cost. We also call upon governments to ensure that media houses and journalists are free and feel free to practice journalism without any hindrance. And then finally also we call upon government to provide information. Nature hates virtues. When there is a virtue, fake news will be created and will be disseminated, and sometimes fake news can be very dangerous.
One of the biggest challenges we've had in Uganda, and I think world over, during this pandemic has been the constant flow of fake news. Fake news is very detrimental to, first of all, government's efforts to contain the spread of this very unfortunate disease, but more importantly, it keeps the citizens of any country, of any sphere, in a bubble of ignorance. And this does not help in efforts to contain or curb the spread of this disease. We have teamed up with various government agencies, specifically the Ministry of Health, and we have been engaged in a non-stop campaign to make the public aware of what COVID-19 is and how the standard operating procedures of the Ministry of Health are designed not to curtail their movements or curtail their enjoyment of life, but to save them from contracting COVID-19. And our appeal is that those engaging in fake news for whatever reason they do so should be made aware that it is detrimental to the good of their own society and therefore their own country.
We have just had a very good deliberation with the FIC regarding freedoms, especially on the digital media. And some of the takeaways probably from this discussion on the part of the regulator is that a lot of the actions or intentions of a communications regulator like the Uganda Communications Commission may be misconstrued in light of the existing legal and regulatory framework. Ideally, it is important to note that regulators and many around the world work with certain instruments, and these instruments range from the Constitution, the laws, regulations, standards, and codes of practice. So because these are instruments and we do our best to make sure that we implement, we enforce according to the book, there have been aspects where civil society have pinpointed that issues of freedoms of expression, privacy, data protection, and name it, could actually be infringed. We usually welcome that if the instruments being used by a regulator need adjustment, need improving, we are usually open to stakeholder consultations to make sure that we can work with policymakers to make these instruments better, to make them up to date, to make sure that they benefit everybody and not just a few people.